going on your writer's journey and everything that you've been able to accomplish and who you are now, where do you think that came from? Where do you think your earliest influence were to set you on that path?
I started writing pretty young, and when it started, there wasn't really any great influence. I just had this story in my head that I had to get out. The first story that I ever actually wrote was actually in middle school. I was in the 7th grade, and we had to write a horror story for Halloween. And I wrote a story called Mommy Dearest, and it just kind of went from there. My grandmother used to tell me that she believed that my urge to write was more genetic because her mother was a writer. It's possible.
So, Miss Kindra, tell everybody where you grew up.
I grew up in Rancho Palos Verdes, California, not too far from Lomita, Redondo Beach, as we were just discussing. And then after 12, we moved to South Carolina, where I was raised in Packlet, South Carolina. Very small town. Barely anybody knows where it is or that it even exists, unless you live there.
What did your parents do for a living?
My father really wasn't around a lot for the first 12 years of my life. But after we moved to South Carolina, he was working as managers, mystery shoppers, things like that. My mom has largely been a stay-at-home mom. She did work for a little while in the emergency room. Pretty much it for them. I was largely raised by my grandparents, who were both meat cutters forever.
Wow. Did anybody have any artistic tendencies? Was anybody artistic in your family?
Not anybody immediate. My great-grandmother that had passed away long before I was even born, we're talking 60s maybe, she was highly artistic. She was vocal, very vocal. She was a singer. She wrote. She was extremely artistic. She even did drawings and things like that. I didn't get to meet her, obviously, but I wish I had.
So you started very early. Did you think that you were going to be a writer at that point, or was it just something you did that you enjoyed? You thought, well, this could be a nice hobby, or did you feel like this is something you wanted to do?
Well, when I first started, it felt like more of a hobby than anything. I didn't actually think I'd get anywhere with it, largely because, that's what I was told growing up. It was kind of hammered into me for a while. I know some people aren't going to like to hear that, but, the truth is the truth. So I did it more of, because I enjoyed it kind of thing. I still enjoy it, obviously, but now I'm actually making a career out of it. I don't think back then I would have ever imagined that I would have 25 plus books and short stories out and still be writing and actually be published by publishing companies and things of that nature, and actually doing pretty well.
What do you remember about those first stories that you wrote that you still kind of hold on to and use as you're writing now?
Well, the early stories I definitely learned a lot from. As far as any kind of influence now, I think I've grown so much that I don't really see a lot of the old, teenager-ish writer Kindra in there anywhere. I think she's pretty much gone now, but my love of horror, science fiction, and fantasy definitely hasn't gone away, especially the love for creating things in those genres. So I think if anything stuck around, it's probably just my love for the genre.
Did you ever think about walking a different path than being a writer? Or were there other professions that you tried that you thought, this might be where I'm destined to be?
Yeah, actually. So when I graduated from high school, I actually started out as a graphic design major in college.
Oh.
I took a year's worth of art courses and things like that, where it was a lot of, hey, draw this because I tell you to. Not you actually get to be creative yet, but it didn't feel right to me. So I actually switched my majors to psychology and actually now have in criminal neuropsychology. I wanted to go work for the FBI. You can see I don't work for the FBI. And right now, I'm working on my master's degree in English and creative writing, and my day job was actually a bankruptcy analyst with a deep subprime auto finance company. So I really enjoy that. I love what I do. It's just not my end game.
What do you think it turned for you? What do you think that writing became more of the path and more of the passion than it didn't?
I want to say it was probably around my early 20s. I was actually, I started dating my husband around that time, and he actually supported the idea of, hey, yeah, you should write, do what you love instead of forcing me to be something else. So I think that was the biggest thing right there. And then I was like, yeah, I could totally do this full time. And the support is a big thing. A lot of people brush it off and say, oh, well, as long as you have yourself and it's what you're passionate about, then you're golden. But realistically, you need your tribe. You need somebody in your corner to keep that support, because there are so many times you're going to get imposter syndrome. You doubt yourself, and you really need someone in your corner to keep pushing you. Sure. And that's where he came in. So
that's awesome. Was there a specific author or storyteller that you looked up to that you thought this is the kind of path that they carved out for themselves that, I think that's the way I want to go?
Yeah, actually growing up, I read a lot of Anne Rice and Stephen King. Those were my two major influences. And then as I got older, more towards, 18-ish, I started reading Laurel K. Hamilton, who is one of my favorites still to this day. And then over the last 5 years, I started reading Mira Grant, who has been a major influence even now too. So those guys right there are like it. They're the ones that showed me that, yeah, you can do this and you should do this. And there are major influences in my career where it stands at this point.
That's interesting because like you have the one aspect of King and Rice being your visual, they're visual storytellers, and then your Grant and all the others, they're more of psychological storytellers.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you as you grew up and you did your psychology stuff, you started to was it because it made more sense? Was it just something that clicked with you? Was it just something that because you were studying that at the time that kind of just flowed the influence through you, or was it just that you're just being more mature and discovering more than you had access to from the beginning?
Well, I think it's a little bit of everything, really. I know getting the degrees and everything definitely helped push me in one direction, but I think I was always probably leaning that way anyway. A lot of what I used to write growing up, especially things, of course, that are never going to see the light of day, were more on, that kind of that balancing act between more of the visual writer and the kind of psychological writer, as you said. So it's kind of been a mixture of that from the beginning, but it's definitely more so now, especially with these influences.
Hey guys, it's me. So I'm not going to be on very long this morning because I only have a few minutes before I have to go into my day job. It's right over there. So Kindra Sowder, the unapologetic writer. That's what I'm going to be going by from now on.
Yeah, you mentioned you have like 25 books out. You have so many stories that you've written over time now. I mean, and you're relatively a young person, so you've written a lot in a short period of time. And I'm kind of, you're heading into these new collaborations, and you're starting to step into new mediums. And we're going to talk a little bit about your episodic journey and what you've been doing in that aspect of it as well. I mean, I know that you probably don't want to reveal a lot because it's just starting, but for that kind of thing, was it because it was the next challenge? Are you constantly looking at that as, you know what, I need to raise my bar and go to the next thing and challenge myself? Or was it, did you really gravitate toward the collaboration aspect of those mediums?
It's a little bit of both. I've always been, of course, as you know, I've always been the horror, sci-fi, fantasy person.
Yeah.
So it's been very easy for me to stick with that, but because I want to push myself as a writer, as an individual, with my career, it was so easy for me to say, hey, yeah, I'm going to try this now. So when I started writing the Miss Hyde novellas and things like that, which is erotic horror, I really pushed myself with that because I'd never written anything erotic before in my life. And I was like, well, who wouldn't want a sexy version of something super scary? So why not give it a shot? As far as collaborations with other writers, these writers are ones that I've been drawn to, whether it be because of the image that they portray of themselves or the work that they've done in the past, like BRYAN, TANN, for instance. He actually came to me about writing the John Baker Chronicles, which is a spinoff of one of my own books. But now, because I've gotten to see his work and I've gotten to see his process and I've read his work as well, some of his other stuff, it made moving on to other projects with him a lot easier. P. Mattern as well, I wrote with her. I loved everything that she did, and I just thought she was a lot of fun. So me and her, they're on Vindicta. I'm also working on a Zombie dystopian fantasy series with, get this, an actor from season 4 of The Walking Dead named Santiago Cirillo, and he is great. Such a positive person. When I would fall asleep at MonsterCon last year, and he would do his thing, I'd be like, awake. I'm gonna have to get a video in Arkansas, Paragould, Arkansas, where I'm gonna be with him in a couple weeks. Oh man, I'm working on about 1 million different things. I actually have a list on my computer because I can't keep up sometimes. Santiago Cirillo, that was more of a push on myself to get myself out there. We actually met at a convention, and I was sitting there thinking to myself, maybe I should give him a book, because sometimes just giving somebody one of the books that you've written is the best thing you could ever do for your career. So I was like, who knows, maybe this can take me a lot farther than I think I can go. So why not give it a shot? So I actually gave him a copy of the first Miss Hyde novella, and he was talking about possibly sending me some screenplays that he had written to see if we wanted to collaborate on anything. But he was going to read the book first. So he read the book, and then not even a week later, he was like, hey, I have these 2 screenplays right here. Read them and pick which one you want to write. So obviously I picked the zombie one. I had never written zombies before, and I thought it would be a lot of fun. And that book right there really pushed me creatively, because a lot of the monsters that he had created, he said, here, make them new. So I did, and I've never looked back.
What do you get from collaborations that you don't get from the solitary writing that you've done so much of?
I feel like the extra boost and the extra support, like, yeah, you're doing great. That's the biggest thing. And the authors that I work with who also kind of force me to push my own limits as well. There may be something that they do a certain way that I typically don't, or they would take a story in a different direction that I normally wouldn't. And then I'd be like, wait, this could work. So it's the support and the fact that they help me push myself and my own limits and my own set of rules. which has helped me a lot as far as my individual work as well.
So now getting into this world that you're about to enter into, this venture that you're doing, yeah, I mean, you're doing. I mean, the timing could not be more perfect. Episodics are very huge right now. They're very much alive in our medium, and they're starting to just take over film festivals, even to a certain extent. So, what have you gathered from these early stages that you're real excited about in doing in challenging yourself with this new medium? And is there something that you're preparing for that you haven't had to prepare for, or you're preparing for differently now than you had before?
So with the zombified show that's being created here, we're still in like this extremely early stages. So we're kind of in the point where things are getting done, but it's not exactly towards actual content yet, because at the beginning, you know, of course, you need the money,
right.
You need all of those things. So at this point, as far as I'm aware, we're still trying to get all of that together, as far as funding. And really, the biggest takeaway I got from this so far was that, oh my God, I get to work with Rick Prince. And I mean, I've been in the pre-production stages of, you know, an episodic before with the Miss Hyde novellas, and that's kind of not going the direction I really wanted it to. Unfortunately, I can't talk about that at the moment, but that's going the other way. So this with Rick and Santiago is actually teaching me a lot more of how it should be done, and showing me more of the behind the scenes aspect, you know, that I wouldn't have seen before, that I haven't seen before working on the other project.
Is the idea to do a pilot episode and put it out there, or are you guys going to actually shoot like maybe some mini episodes, or do several episodes and put it online and then try and gather momentum that way? What is the direction you think you guys are headed towards?
For me, I'm going to assume, normally I would say pilot episode, you know, put that out there and see who we can grab with the pilot episode. And then if we can get, you know, a good enough following with that episode and things like that, and then work on the rest later. But a part of me wants to say that I think this is probably going to be like a one-shot thing. You know, we go in, we film all the episodes, and then we sell it. So I don't know exactly which direction we plan to go. I have not actually gotten to talk to Rick or Santiago about that particular aspect of it yet, but those talks are coming very, very soon. So hopefully I'll have some more information within the next few weeks.
Is that exciting for you?
It is. It is, because I'll get to go up to Tennessee and meet one of the people that I admire in special effects. You know, I was a huge fan of Face Off. Still am. I'm kind of a little behind, but huge fan. And I was a big fan of Rick when he was on season 5. And then when he got cut, I was so mad. But now actually being able to work with him on this, it's really, really exciting. So whenever I get to have that meeting, I don't know if I'm just going to be, you know, the shy person that I was when I met Santiago originally, or if I'm going to be the fangirl that met Brian Krause a couple years ago. I'm not sure which one I'm going to be yet, but yes, I am excited.
Is this kind of the direction you see yourself going? Do you feel like this is the medium that you want to tackle now? Or are you still pretty adamant that you're going to be writing more novels coming? Or is there another challenge ahead that you're looking forward to?
Obviously, of course, I want to do more television, more film, things like that. But my heart is in the written word. So I know that's always going to be a driving passion of mine. I know I'm always going to do it. The film, television is a plus. As far as other media, yes, absolutely. I like to push my boundaries, and I like to push and see what else I can possibly do. So right now, on top of the zombified TV show, we actually have in the works a zombified graphic novel, which Santiago. We can't say names yet, but Santiago did let me know that it's somebody doing it that freelances for Marvel and DC. So I'm even more excited about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was going to say, I was going to ask you, are you going to step back into your graphic design days?
No, absolutely not. I am so out of practice. Like, we're talking so out of practice. I haven't touched any of it since I was 19 years old. That's how bad it is.
But it's like riding a bike, right?
Oh, I wish. I wish. No, I used to draw a lot. I don't really draw a lot anymore. As far as graphic design goes, I've done covers. I did the Zombified cover, but as far as like anything like that, no, definitely not.
Is Ed pushing you to do more covers?
No, thank God. I was so stressed out with those covers.
All right, let's get into your art. Let's talk about your characters and your worlds and everything that you do. Talk about the first character you ever wrote. What was the first character you've ever written, and how have they shaped everything you've written ever since?
Okay, so the first character I ever wrote was in that short story, Mommy Dearest, that I wrote in middle school. I can't remember the main character's name, but she actually came from an abusive household. Her mother had passed away years back. Her mother was actually the abuser. And she was very reserved. She was not willing to fight too hard. Of course, products of abuse, they typically have a lot of them have more of a standoffish kind of, and that's what she was. As far as how she has helped shape future characters that I've created, they're definitely just as flawed as she is, but I've made a point since then to create strong-willed women. Mm-hmm. And I've just continued to do that. I write strong women. It's what I prefer. So writing someone that I felt was more of a weak-minded individual back then just kind of drove me to write the other kind of woman. And considering my own evolution from that same kind of person to how I am now has helped drive that too. Mm-hmm. So,
do you ever think you could revisit that kind of character?
Probably. I probably could. I don't know if I would want to, but it's definitely something that I could do again if I decided to go back to that.
What is it about? What is the hardest aspect for you in creating a strong female character? What would you say you struggle with in that respect?
I think one of the difficult things for me is writing the kind of strong women that can still fall to the enemy, so to speak. I have to really force myself to make her, a little bit weaker. I'm a little bit frayed around the edges to make sure that certain things that can happen in the novel or should happen in the novel do. When I'm creating a strong woman, I have a tendency to be like over the top strong, that attitude, courage, all of these things. But then sometimes in my head when I'm developing this woman, I'm like, wait a second, she's got to have something under the surface, at least, that makes her a little bit scared on the inside. So when I'm creating a new character, I really have to think about that and push myself to make sure that I've got something in her background and that I show that in her background so people know that, hey, she's not just creating somebody who can kick your ass. She's creating somebody that's realistic.
I'm wondering what characteristics you value in your protagonist and antagonist that you always try to stick to.
Ooh, so that's a tough one. Because when I'm creating a character, I'm thinking more about the story that I'm trying to create as a whole. So I don't really think any of my characters really have anything in common that I try to inject into them when I'm creating them. I've never really noticed anything like that before. If anybody does, trust me, I'm more than happy to listen to them tell me why I'm wrong. But I don't really subscribe to any particular traits. No.
Where do you think a character takes shape for you, though, in your writing? When do you feel like it's starting to really come together?
For me, I don't think that character's really starting to hit home for me and really develop as a character until they get to that first struggle. Yeah, because, with the Permutation Archives, for me, Mila was a great character, yes. But I didn't feel like she was actually real to me on that level until her abduction. And then what she went through since then. Especially later on when she got hit with a lot of harder things. The Executioner trilogy, I kind of felt, I developed Robin for so long that I think that she just always kind of felt real to me in a lot of aspects. But for me, if we're going to talk about, true development, for me it was when she first met Gordon, of course. Blythe and the Miss Hyde novellas. She was kind of real to me and so super developed from the beginning because I was trying so hard to create something so different that I wanted to make sure that I understood exactly what this character was when I first started, before I even put the first words down on the page. So I think I accomplished that.
Are you so it sounds like you build your character exoskeleton and so you add some emotional elements as well before you tackle the environment they're going to be put into or before you really develop a story. Is that fair to say? Or just those certain characters, just a couple of those characters?
Usually like the main character, I'll think about them at first and then I'll be like, okay, so what kind of world am I going to put this person in? The Permutation Archives, I had actually devised that world pretty early. So when I started thinking about the main character, I was like, okay, so this character is in this world. She's different than everybody else. But, and then go from there. So.
Yes. What has your audience taught you that you were either naive to or just plain wrong about that you now apply to every story going forward?
That's a tough question. Well, because, they always say, don't read your reviews. So I try really hard not to do that. So with the Executioner trilogy, I actually had one really long review that was left. I believe it was a 2-star, if I remember correctly. She had said something about superficiality. Like, the character for her was a little too superficial. So when I started moving on to the rest of those books even, I was making a point to take away from that and be like, okay, so what can I do to bring more life into this character to where I don't get hit with this, that's a superficial character again. So I think for me, that was the biggest takeaway. I've definitely learned a lot from that experience, and that right there was enough for me. So I really try not to go back and read the reviews anymore after that, because some of them were downright mean. Like,
sure. I was more referring to like your beta readers and
oh, my beta readers. Well, I don't have a lot of beta readers because usually I'm just so guarded about my own work. I think that has a lot to do with how I was raised. I was using a friend of mine. His name is Thomas Leland. I think he's a fantastic beta reader. He goes through and he picks it apart. If this doesn't work, he'll tell you. Or if this character wouldn't say that, he'll tell you. Or, hey, look at this big glaring plot hole right here. And focus on that for a little bit. I've learned a lot from him. He's helped me shape a lot of my stories over the last 4 or 5 years. He's taught me a lot of lessons about humility, to say the least. I'm so guarded about my own concepts. I'm guarded about my work, things like that. So I don't usually leave it open to a lot of people. But as far as I learn from him, it's humility and actually learning to love my own work without hating it so much first.
I don't believe there would be an artist out there that wouldn't go along with what you're saying. You know, there is a certain guarded nature with us as artists, because we want to feel it's protected until it's ready to be unleashed a little bit, right? So, and
then even after that, sometimes we're like, how dare you?
Yeah.
All the time.
Do you because you know him so well and he knows you now and you've used him for various things, do you set traps for him just to see if he catches them?
No, I can't make myself do that. Because when I'm writing it, if I see the trap, if I see something, I'm like, I can't leave that. I can't leave it like that, even if it's on purpose to see if he catches it. I can't.
Nice. That's good. That's good.
So just so he knows, he's safe.
I'll be sure to keep that part of this in here for him so he knows that. All right, so I've been told that from many people who've read your stuff and people who know you very well, that one of the strengths that you have and one of the things you love to do is world build. So let's talk a lot about the world building process here. What part of the world building process do you really, really love? What is the thing that you really look forward to when you're starting to build a world?
Creating the conflict.
The
conflict is my number one. So, I love developing the culture too, if it's going to be anything that's completely different than what we currently have, obviously. But, so for the Permutation Archives, that was based so far into the future. Is science fiction, dystopian, kind of superhero fiction, if you will. These people have these different abilities, things like that. They live in a future where there hasn't been war for quite some time, but part of the reason is because the United States has completely walled itself off. And I'm saying that literally. Walled itself off from the rest of the world, so the rest of the world's basically crap. So we don't get ourselves continuously pulled into wars that aren't meant for us to fight. So they have that issue going on. And then on top of that, you have this discovery that there are people that are different. Kind of like X-Men-ish type of deal. And those people obviously need to be tested. They need to be experimented on. We need to know what their limits are and see what we can use them for. So that was basically the whole entire conflict behind that. And of course, it's based in the future. It's science fiction. They have newfangled technology. They have all of these different things that they can use to harvest these abilities if they can't talk them into being, on their side. And the Executioner trilogy was based in very modern Los Angeles, so that was easy enough. Zombified, now if you want to talk about real world building, that was definitely the most world building I think I have done in a long time, except for what I'm currently working on. I've got a couple things I'm working on that are actually more involved. But in Zombified, in the first few chapters of the book, you have this meteor shower that strikes and causes pandemonium, as well as this rapid infection of zombies. So there are 4 different types of infection depending on what kind of infection you happen to get.
Wow.
So there's a brain 2 different stages of brain infection of these parasites that we created. And then there's one that infects the bloodstream. There's also one that affects the heart. So that creates these different creatures based on where this parasite decided to set up shop. And then on top of that, after that, we jump to 7 years in the future where we have the United States in its former glory. We have the government of defense that controls everything. There are different stations around the country where people help continue to run the government in its new incarnation. They're mostly centered around military. That whole entire world was completely rebuilt from the ground up.
Wow.
And that's kind of one of my favorites right now, actually. That the Permutation Archives, and then some of the other stuff I'm working on right now, which I'm not going to get too far into. There's aliens in one. Just
nice.
that.
All right. Cool. Yeah. I'm curious, for somebody who's going for their master's degree, are you somebody that really applauds heavy research? Do you like to do heavy research, or is it because how much research you have to do to be getting your master's degree? Do you go, oh, now I got to do this in my other thing too?
I've always loved research.
Right.
Always. I don't think there was anything that I ever did that I didn't heavily research. When I started getting my master's degree, I researched the crap out of every single school that I could possibly look at. Looked at their programs, compared when it comes to Zombified and the zombies in that novel. It was a lot of biology. So I actually got to use my husband on some of this. We actually discuss at length how the zombies are able to stay alive, even though they're rotting. So that's actually heavily discussed. Everything's broken down in there. Right now, I'm researching.
You've ever climbed into?
The biggest wormhole I've ever climbed into? It's actually religion. Religion. I was actually raised Mormon. I left the church when I was 16 years old. I just decided it was not for me. It's not for everybody. And so I knew things on the same level that I do now. For this series that I'm working on, it's called Ashes of Heaven. I take religion and I completely rip it apart and put it back together. And I know it's going to make a lot of people really angry. I really honestly don't care. But so far, religion has been the biggest black hole I have ever willingly climbed into.
Is there something interesting that you found out that you didn't know before that you would go, oh, that's pretty cool?
I'm trying to think. There's some very interesting stuff. Being raised in a completely different sector of the Christian faith was, looking at a lot of this stuff is actually pretty eye-opening. Like, I did not know that the Book of Enoch existed. No clue. until I started doing a lot more research and things like that into what I'm using to build the world of Ashes of Heaven. The Book of Enoch, though, has been a really interesting find for me because for one, I never even knew it existed, and two, there's really only one church in the entire world that still uses it. That's been the most interesting thing so far. There's a lot of interesting stuff, but for me, being able to discover something else like that is a big deal.
Talk about, because you do series, you do trilogies, and it seems like you've always been on that path. And I know you've done some one-offs and you've done some short stories or some novellas and things like that. But the interesting thing about that I find about series writers and trilogy writers is that you're thinking in that lineage, right? You're thinking book 1, 2, 3, 4, and so how do you design? What is your approach to designing how much information you give away in each chapter? And do you have a design for that? Or is it you just let it all flow out and then you decide where you're going to cut it out at? Or is there something you're very careful about in the reveal staging of what you're doing?
So some may be disappointed to know that there is no rhyme or reason for me as to why I write series or, where I decide to end chapters, start new chapters, things like that. It's more of a feeling. It's when my gut tells me, hey, you are done and you need to move on. So I feel like I'm actually very good at picking and choosing, that my gut is actually very good at telling me when is a good time.
Nice.
So I think it's more intuitive than anything. I don't actually plan any of that.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
So in that respect, is there something that you've is there something that you've learned in doing it that way that you just kind of going with it? Is that's just the approach is just go with it, right? So
just go with it. Yeah. And I mean, I have learned that a lot of readers hate my cliffhangers.
that means you're doing something right.
I'm not going to apologize for it at all.
Yeah.
No.
No, that means you're doing it right.
That's what I said. The good thing is about, a really well executed cliffhanger is that, yes, it does leave you hanging, but at the same time, it answers so many questions. So if you craft a really good cliffhanger, you're going to answer all of those questions that popped up in that book, but then the new questions are going to start at that very last sentence.
You don't have to mention specifics, but no. Did any of that, in doing something like that, did that ever get you in trouble? Did you ever go, oh crap, I really have to explain this and I didn't really want to explain this from the beginning?
Not that I can think of. I haven't had anybody come up to me and say, I hate you. You did this and you shouldn't have done that. No. Not once. Not yet, but I'm waiting for somebody to say it.
So in your mind's eye, what are one or two of your favorite scenes that you've ever written?
One actually comes in the Permutation Archives. It was this big reveal. I think it was which one was it? Book 4. I believe it was book 4, where Mila learns some information that definitely makes her mad. I mean, extremely mad. She starts to doubt everything that she's doing, doubts herself even. Like, what kind of person am I? Because I have this, that I didn't know I had before. And that for me was one of my favorite. Because she had to learn how to take that information and build on herself in different ways than she would have if she didn't find that out. So I'm writing the 6th Miss Hyde novel as well right now. And the first chapter, after a big reveal at the end of book 5, is another one of my favorites. She's trying to process this information that was given to her and trying to figure out what to do with it. I kind of let her get a little soft in book 5. And now, because of the information that she was given, she's coming back full force and she's not playing games anymore.
What scenes do fans want to talk to you about the most?
The ones that really piss them off, usually.
Yeah. The ending of most of them.
Yeah, like the ending of most of them. Why did you do that? I can't believe it. What is she going to do now? Now you have to wait for the next one. Or if the next one's already out, well, why don't you go ahead and go buy it, and then you can find out. Actually, the big reveal in the Permutation Archives that I was talking about, my beta reader was even like, what the hell did you do that for?
Nice.
I don't regret any of it. I'm sorry.
I have a feeling, you know, I ask this question, and it's usually the one that's very salivating for most authors. But I have a feeling for you grow a connection to these characters. It seems like like you have kind of a kinetic energy connection with them, or some, you know, not to say that they're you or that you made them personal, but I mean they're always that way for any artists that make everything personal to a certain extent. But they are fiction, and you can remove yourself from them. But in killing a character, how do you approach that? What is your approach? Is it a real thoughtful process, or is it, fuck it, they're dead?
So the deaths for me are very methodic. I actually place them very intentionally. The way they die is very intentional. There's no accident about it whatsoever. Those deaths have been planned out since day one. So
have you ever adjusted that plan?
No. No. I've been very good about sticking with the plans that I lay down, because, you know, when it comes to these character deaths, for me, it usually has a lot to do with character development. So I want this character to develop at this certain stage, which means this death needs to happen at such and such point in such and such way to drive that. There is the death that I wrote in The Harvested was actually, while it was very well planned out, it was actually very difficult for me. I grew connected to that character. It was one of her best friends. You know, it's not really a spoiler. It drives it drives a lot of what she does. Her friend Kato is actually killed in the first half of the book. Something that she is actually forced to do herself, which made it a lot harder. But it was his death was very drawn out, and I did that for a reason. Every time I read it, or every time I hear it in audio or anything like that, I tear up. But that one was the most difficult for me. I can't really reveal too many other deaths without giving huge, massive spoilers, which I don't want to do.
Do you find that it gets easier to decide to kill a character as you get more mature in your writing process, or has it become harder?
It depends on the character largely. Some of them I obviously, you know, like most writers, have a greater connection to than others.
Yeah, sure.
The one death that I actually have planned in the Miss Hyde novellas is going to be satisfactory and horribly sad all at the same time. But I won't give those reasons out just yet. But I think, yeah, largely depends on the character, whether I get super upset about it or not. Of course, the older I get and the more I realize that these things are necessary, it's gotten a little bit easier. I won't say it's not difficult ever, because sometimes it still is, but the more mature you get, the more, like I said, the more you realize that these things are necessary events and that they do need to happen. It gets a little bit easier as you go. Yeah,
it becomes more of the reality of your life, right, than it did before.
Exactly.
What is your favorite way to start a story? Are you somebody who likes to jump in with some exposition? Do you like to have like a conversation? Or is it just a mixture? However the story is going to start is how it's going to start? Or do you have a favorite way to do it?
It is a mixture of things. In some, I'll start off with a conversation. Some of them, I'll start off with some internal dialogue. But it largely just depends on what feels right for that story. It's more, for me, I'm more of a gut writer. I'm very much the pantser, except for maybe a couple things. But for me, it's as I've developed the story, as I've developed what I'm going to do, as I've developed these characters and how the story is going to unfold, it depends on what feels right for me at the time.
How much thought process does it go into where to put the world building aspects like you were talking about developing a religion or developing, the political aspects or the dogma of the world. How much thought do you put into that, or is it just part of the flow of your writing?
It's usually the part of the flow.
Mm-hmm.
Revealing certain aspects of different things for me when I'm writing, if I'm like, oh, this is a good time to say this about this particular part of this world that you created. It's very, I don't want to say it's methodic because it's not hugely methodic. I'd say it's probably about 50-50 intuition and method.
So when you're done with the first draft, what is this first thing you always tackle when you get into the second draft? What is something that you always do once you've finished the first draft?
Usually I add.
Interesting.
I am really bad about that. So usually a lot of the time is, I don't want to say basic because it's not basic in the most basic sense of the word. It's still, you built this world, you built these characters, you put all this out on paper. But for me, there's always something that could be said on top of what you already said. So when I go into a second draft, usually that's where I'm going through. I'm like, where can I flesh things out more? That'll help the reader better understand exactly what's going on, the whys, the hows, all of those things. And then usually I won't actually get into the actual editing portion until I hit about draft 3.
What has been one of your favorite ancillary characters to create? I know you're really big on the lead characters, but is there one that you really you gravitate toward, or even if your fans have asked you about if you're going to write something about them that you've thought about writing something for?
So, I like Gaia, Mila's sister in the Permutation Archives. She's a little soft. I did that intentionally to begin with. People have asked, hey, is there going to be more of a story for her? And I'm like, well, if you read the John Baker Chronicles, you'll figure it out. She's a very heavy presence in that series. So, yeah, she's definitely in there. I haven't really had too many people approach me about writing anything outside of that. Not anything that I actually thought about doing myself. Like I was thinking about origin stories for Gordon, origin stories for Beth, origin stories for so many of the other characters that I've developed that are more ancillary. Like, I know one that I've actually been thinking about diving into is because I love him so much is a character named Ajax from the Permutation Archives that didn't come in until book 2. He's kind of, laid back, ex-military, kind of like the Matthew McConaughey of the world. And when I was talking to my narrator about doing the audiobook, I said, I want him to have that slow, deliberate speech that Matthew McConaughey has. Can you do that? And she's like, absolutely. And I love him so much. He connected on a very deep kind of fatherly level with the main character. And I know that there are probably more people out there than just me that want to know more about him. And it's actually one that I'm considering.
Nice. What is BRYAN brought to your Permutation Archives that you didn't have before, that you are now applying to future stories you're going to write within that world?
When it comes to, because me and him were writing, the first John Baker and the second John Baker at the same time I was writing the rest of that original series. So he actually was very helpful and instrumental in some of the technology in the later books. So I know he's definitely done that.
Nice.
I love working with him so much. That's why I plan on doing so many other things with him. He brings an element of, the rawness in, not in a bad way. Not like, oh, you just sat down, wrote stuff on a piece of paper and put it out there for the world. It's not the same.
The great thing about Kindra is that she and I we're like siblings in a lot of ways. It just fits. Like I've come to her with something. I don't think she's ever told me no, because I think before I come to her with something. But I don't come to her with something that it's the end all be all, because it's her world. And I recognize that, you know, like John Baker is my baby, but my baby is in her world.
But more of the raw, what the world actually is stuff.
He says that you guys connected on a level that like it clicked immediately, and that
We did.
and that you finish each other's sentences sometimes.
Yeah, that connection was instant. We work very well together. We flow really well off of one another. If I'm stuck, he can pull me out of that hole. And it's not just on the literary level. You know, I think of him as my brother. We just have that strong of a bond. And it helps that we work so well together career-wise as well. Having that connection outside of that helps that connection within that.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what element of for a character do you feel shapes your character the most? Is it the environment they're in? Is it the relationships? Is it their background? Where do you find you get the most well-roundedness to your characters when you're writing?
So as soon as you said that, my brain instantly went psychology, and you know, I was thinking, nature versus nurture. Which one? Realistically, it's a mixture of things. But I think one of the number one things that actually influences my character development is their relationships with the other characters.
In doing kind of erotic, you mentioned earlier that was kind of out of your comfort zone, that you kind of challenged yourself a little bit with that idea. Do you feel like as artists, the biggest struggle sometimes is that we get too comfortable, that the challenge isn't there, and that you should always look for a different challenge? Do you feel like that's an important part of being an artist?
Yes. For me, as an artist in any media, it's about growth. You have to be able to grow. And if you don't go outside of your comfort zone, sometimes that growth is very difficult to achieve. I know there are some people that can grow as writers, grow as artists, things like that, without having to push themselves like that. But me, I would prefer to jump off that ledge. And then if I fail, I learn something from it. Either way.
Yeah. What did erotica give you that you didn't expect it to give you, that you actually thought, wow, that's pretty cool that I got that from that experience?
I would say it helped me gain a little bit of a level of confidence. It was definitely way outside my wheelhouse. So when I wrote that first erotic scene, it was very, very awkward. When you can do something and master it, then you gain the confidence to continue to do that, and then continue to push yourself to other things, push your limits.
So that being said, you're in your mastery. What does every Kindra Sowder story have to have?
A kick-ass lady.
Nice.
Simple. I'm simple. I'm not super complicated, we'll think. If we're talking symbolism or, you know, Easter eggs, me and symbolism do not get along. I'm going to go ahead and say that now. I am the biggest advocate against literary theory. I know that's really bad, considering I'm getting my master's degree in English and creative writing. It's mostly, I'd say 95% literary theory and analysis, which I hate. So I don't intentionally put anything in there, but if a reader catches something, then that's great. I mean, I write very intentionally, and for me, if there's going to be any symbolism anywhere, it's going to be something that the reader's going to find, which has actually happened. There's a friend of mine. He actually met him through one of my company's authors, Ryan Lansky, who was talking about and I harp on the series a lot, but The Harvested, he had actually read The Harvested, and he was talking about different symbolism from Mesopotamia, and then her name and things like that, and certain events. And that was like not intentional, but super cool that you made that connection.
Do you like when fans approach you with that kind of idea, though? Are you interested in that?
Yeah, I do. It's not for me. I won't do it. But if they come to me and they find something in there that really resonated with them on an emotional, symbolic level, anything like that, I am more than happy to hear it. It just lets me know that I actually reached them.
Yeah, sure.
and made that connection with them. So that's a big deal. And that's what we want.
Nice.